Welcome back to the problem with everybody. So before we start, I want to let you guys know this has nothing to do with the podcast. It's just want to let you know that I'm currently do have a new desk on me. I'm excited for this. It's a standing desk. So if my voice sounds a little different, maybe that's because of the microphone. It's in a different direction, but maybe it's better for the best. And I try to do the standing desk idea because the more I realized that sitting down it hurts my back, and no matter what chair I use, it just bothered me. But anyways, so today we're gonna talk about something that you probably have heard a lot. So we'll get into it. So this is today's episode of Last We Tell. Let's get into it. So, have you ever have someone lie to your face with so much confidence, and you start wondering, did you miss something? Like they say it with their whole chest, very confident, like deadpan and smug. And suddenly you're sitting there thinking, wait, is 2 plus 2 actually 5 now? Did we read right math again? Because that's what it feels like when you hear someone, usually on a Facebook thread, usually rocking a flag in their profile, it coming in hot with this. The Republicans are the party of Lincoln. Democrats started the KKK. We are the real anti-racist. Ever heard of the Civil Rights Act? Like, congratulations on your history class from 1870. But we're living in 2025. And your party is trying to erase the history you're bragging about. And this isn't just bad faith debating. It's not just misinformed. Because it's deliberate. Because what you're hearing is part of the strategy. A weaponized version of history, polished and mass-produced for Fox News, Facebook memes, Tucker Carlson, the Turning Point USA, any of those rejects on YouTube and TikTok. Because it's bait, it's gaslighting, it's lazy attempt to hide the present behind a cherry-picked version of the past. So let's set the record straight, because we're not going to let this revisionist cosplay slide anymore. Yeah, Republicans did free the slaves. Yes, we all agree that Abraham Lincoln was a Republican. That is true. But so was Dwight D. Eisenhower. You don't see people today lining up to vote like Ike. In the Republican Party of the 1860s is not the party of the Marjorie Taylor Greenes, Donald Trump, or J.D. Vance, DeSantis, Matt Gaetz, name any of the Republicans, and they're not the same. And let's be honest, you don't get to spend every election cycle whining about the Civil Rights Act. And then in the next spread, you're defending Confederate monuments and crying about critical race theory in third grade classrooms. If the only time you mention black history is when you're weaponizing it against black people, you're not honoring history. You're hijacking it. Because the Republicans, every Black History Month time, they love to quote the I Have a Dream part. And it's always that little section, and you know what I mean. But they don't read the whole thing. They don't understand what Martin Luther King Jr. was really about. And so let's talk about this so-called party switch. Because right-wing pundits treat it like a conspiracy theory cooked up in a liberal think tank. But it's real. It's documented. It's a damn congressional record. And here's the short version. The switch didn't happen overnight. It wasn't one big dramatic swap, like a game of political Freaky Friday. It was a decades of drift, of division, and yes, a deliberate strategy. When the Democrat Party began embracing civil rights in the mid-20th century, Southern white voters, many of whom had been loyal Democrats since the Civil War, they flipped. And the Republican Party saw an opportunity. Enter the Southern strategy. And Richard Nixon and his cronies didn't even try to hide it. They knew they could win elections by appealing to the white fear. White fear, white flight, all that. And not by yelling slurs from podiums, but by using the coded language. Crime, welfare, busing, states' rights. They took racism, cleaned it up for TV, and called it politics. This isn't conspiracy. It's documented. Former GOP operatives have admitted it. Scholars have studied it. Hell, even Lee Atwater, one of the architects of the modern Republican machine, openly confessed to it in a 1981 interview. And I'm gonna censor myself because this is terrible. Okay, here we go. You start out in 1954 by saying N. N-word, N-word, N-word. By 1968, you can't say N-word. That hurts you. Backfires. So you say stuff like forced busing, states' rights, and all that stuff. He said all that. And if you think I'm making it up, listen, this is all in congressional records. Go find it yourself. I'll put the link below in this. And that's the Republican strategy, admitting that the racism didn't go away. It just got a better PR system. So when people say, well, Lincoln freed the slaves, but can't explain why Lincoln's party is now cheering for book bans, attacking DEI, and passing voter suppression laws, you have to ask, what do they really mean, though? Because let me be clear, the issue isn't that Republicans used to be better. The issue is they've spent 50 years pretending they still are, while doing everything they can to undermine the very communities they claim to support. And the most cynical part of this whole bait and switch, they use our pain, the black pain, Latino pain, immigrant pain, queer pain, as a smokescreen, and they tell us, don't blame us, it's the Democrats who started all this. As if we don't remember who blocked the voting rights bills. As if we don't remember who stormed the Capitol in the rage over black voters in Georgia and Detroit. As if we don't know what great replacement theory is and who keeps pushing it. And listen, I'm not here to defend the Democratic Party like they're saints. They're not. They have their own dark chapters. Slavery, segregation, the 1994 crime bill, the deportation machine under Obama. We can name it all. And also the current the establishment Democrats. But this idea that all the sins of history belong to one party while the other wears a halo? No, it's not true. That's not true. That's propaganda. And so today we're diving in. We're breaking the whole myth apart. Piece by piece, we'll talk about the real story of Lincoln and the Civil War and what motivated the Emancipation Proclamation, the evolution of both parties through the 20th century, and why this switch happened. And then we'll talk about the coded language, the Southern strategy, the political realignments, and the backlash to Black Power, and why clinging to 1865 doesn't excuse what they're doing in 2025. Because if you claim to love Black history but attack Black leaders, Black voters, and Black students, we see you. If you claim to honor Lincoln but celebrate a president who defends white supremacists and who's a rapist, and so far, and also possibly a big-time pedophile, just saying, we see you. And if you say the party's never changed, then explain why you did. So to all the I did my research uncles on Facebook and all the fake historians on YouTube and the politicians waving MLK quotes while banning AP American Studies, you're not fooling anymore. And you're not fooling anyone. So let's get into it. So let's get into the very first big lie. The one that plays on repeat like it's a broken cassette in every political Facebook group or TikTok stitch or in a fake history documentary on YouTube and Netflix and all of those. Here's the lies. Ready? Republicans freed the slaves. Democrats started the KKK. We are the party of Lincoln. The Civil Rights Act wouldn't have passed without Republicans. And then so who are the real racist? I mean, do you all have like new material or something? Like something else? It's the same thing every time. And let's be honest, this isn't education. This isn't some earnest attempt to learn from history. It's always the same thing, propaganda. Plain and simple. It's a bait and switch built in historical context collapse, where a few cherry-picked facts get twisted into a total false narrative. Let's start with some facts. Yes, Abraham Lincoln was a Republican. He ran on a platform that opposed the expansion of slavery into new territories. And yes, his Emancipation Proclamation in 1863 technically freed slaves in the Confederacy. But let's pause right here. Because the Republican Party, that was a radically different institution than what we see today. And Lincoln's motivations weren't just about some deep moral commitment to racial justice. And because he wasn't Frederick Douglass. In fact, in an 1862 letter to Horace Greeley, Lincoln explicitly said, and I quote, "If I could save the Union without freeing any slave, I would do it. I intend no modification of my oft expressed personal wish that all men everywhere could be free." So yes, slavery was immoral, but preserving the Union, that was priority number one. The Emancipation Proclamation was a wartime strategy designed to weaken the Confederacy and dissuade foreign powers like Britain and France from siding with them. It wasn't a sweeping moral revolution. It didn't even free all enslaved people, just the ones in Confederate territory. The North still had slavery in places like Kentucky and Delaware after the proclamation. Now, let's talk about the party. And if you think like, oh, you just hate Lincoln, like, listen, this is, what else can I do? I love the movie Lincoln. I think what he did was amazing. It's just precedents are complicated. So don't go to my comments saying that you're just a hater. You don't know. If the war could have been prevented in that way, he would have done it. That's just it is. That's all it is. Was he internally believe that slavery was immoral? Yes. Just like everybody thinks about that. Well, not everybody, but the point is that being a president in this country is about making middle ground decisions, and people don't, and not, it doesn't please everybody. All right. Anyways, let's talk about the party platforms. The Republican Party in the 1860s was a new progressive party, a coalition of anti-slavery activists, northern industrialists, and former Whigs. The Democratic Party, especially in the South, was the party of white supremacy, plantation slavery, and violent racial control. No one's denying that. But both parties evolved, both parties flipped. And today's Republican Party, it has nothing in common with the party of Lincoln. It's just beyond the name. That's not just speculation, that's political science, that's voting records, that's decades of demographic and ideological shifts. Now think about this. Why is it always the ones who wave the Confederate flags, the ones who vote Republican? Just saying. Now, let's talk about the Southern strategy. In the 1960s, when the civil rights movement gained momentum and Democrats under Lyndon B. Johnson passed the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965, Southern white voters revolted. Barry Goldwater, Republican nominee in 1964, opposed the Civil Rights Act, and he won 5 Deep South states despite losing in a massive national landslide. Richard Nixon saw the writing on the wall, and he adopted the Southern strategy, a calculated plan to peel white voters away from the Democrats using coded racial language. And you see it all the time, guys. It's still, to this day, we still use it. We're talking about terms like law and order, states' rights, even sometimes the welfare queen stuff, but that was more like Reagan. I mean, come on. And we see it, all that stuff. To this day, it's still working apparently. And they weren't yelling slurs. They didn't have to. They knew the subtext. Even Lee Atwater, one of Nixon's top strategists, admitted in a 1981 interview. I already said the quote, guys, but sometimes you gotta repeat it because sometimes people forget. And here's the quote that he said, and I'm gonna censor myself. You start out in 1954 by saying N-word, N-word, N-word. By 1968, you can't say that. It backfires. So you say stuff like forced busing states' rights. He literally admitted it, that racism didn't go away. Like I said, it just got better PR. So no, the modern GOP doesn't get to wave around the Emancipation Proclamation like a press pass. Not when they spent the past half century courting the same white Southern rebutters who once cheered George Wallace yelling, "Segregation now, segregation forever." Now, let's zoom in on the KKK myth. Yes, the Ku Klux Klan was originally founded by Confederate veterans in the post-Civil War South, many of whom were Democrats. But the idea that today's Democratic Party is responsible for the KKK, that's like blaming modern Germany for the Nazi Party. Political parties evolve, countries change. That's literally the point of democracy. People learn, fight, grow, and shift. What the Democrats started the KKK talking point ignores is that the Klan had just as many sympathizers in the GOP by the 1920s, especially in Midwestern states like Indiana and Ohio. In fact, Warren G. Harding, a Republican president, had known Klan supporters in his cabinet. Same thing with Donald Trump. Shocking. Now, about the Civil Rights Act. Another favorite gotcha line. Republicans passed the Civil Rights Act. And that's partly true. In 1964, more congressional Republicans voted for the act than Democrats, numerically speaking. But let's unpack that. Southern Democrats, known as Dixiecrats, were the main opposition. Northern Democrats were overwhelmingly in favor. And the Republicans who supported civil rights, they were mostly liberal, moderate Northeastern Republicans. Many of those liberal Republicans, people like Jacob Javits and Edward Brooke, will be expelled from today's GOP for being too woke. Meanwhile, the very next year, most of those Dixiecrats, like Strom Thurmond, left the Democratic Party and joined the GOP. That wasn't a coincidence. That was the realignment. And now let's fast forward to today. Because let's ask yourself, which party is pushing for voting ID laws that disproportionately impact black and Latino or brown voters? Which party is banning books about civil rights leaders and slavery from school libraries? Which party is crying about DEI and wokeness while gutting diversity programs? DEI is their new version of the N-word. Come on. Which party is defending the January 6th insurrectionists, many of whom waved Confederate flags through the Capitol? If you're still screaming Lincoln freed the slaves while cheering the modern GOP's war on black education, you're not pro-black history. You're hiding behind it. You're hiding in racism is what it is. So what does all this mean? It means history isn't a TikTok soundbite. It's not a party trick. It's not a shield you get to hide behind while doing the exact opposite of what you claim to represent. And here's the quote I want to end this segment on. Yes, Lincoln was a Republican, but that Republican Party doesn't exist anymore, just like the 1860 Democratic Party doesn't either. Again, the stuff in the 1860s right now don't apply to today's life. Both parties change. And the real question isn't who did what in 1865 and who's doing that what now. And if your answer is book bans, voter suppression, Confederate cosplay, and hate-baiting cable news, you've already told us everything we need to know. So don't come at us with revisionist history and cherry-pick slogans, because this time we're fact-checking in real time. So let's pick up where we left off, because you heard the line. And I'm going to say it again, because I want you guys to understand how deep this myth goes. Republicans freed the slaves. Democrats were the racists. But here's the thing. History isn't frozen in time. Political parties are not fixed ideologies. They're coalitions, strategies, and movements. And they evolve. And in this segment, we're going to walk through the real story of the party switch. Piece by piece, decade by decade. Because no, it didn't happen overnight. It wasn't like Republicans woke up racist in 1964. It was a slow, strategic, and deliberate. Let's go all the way back. Let's start with the 1930s and the 40s, the New Deal realignment. The roots of the realignment start with the Great Depression. The economy collapses. Hoover, a Republican, does basically nothing. And into the vacuum steps in Franklin D. Roosevelt with the New Deal. Now, here's the kicker. The New Deal wasn't racially progressive. A lot of its programs excluded black Americans, especially in the South. it was agricultural workers and domestic workers where most black folks were employed, left out of Social Security. The FHA redlined black neighborhoods and blocked access to mortgages. But still, FDR talked about lifting up the poor. He spoke to working class struggle in a way that transcended race, at least rhetorically. And for many black voters, that was the first time the federal government felt like it was listening. Black Americans who had been loyal to the Republican Party, the party of Lincoln for generations, you can't blame them because, I mean, slavery was abolished under the Republican Party. They were loyal. Of course they were. I don't blame them. But they started to switch at that time. Between 1932 and 1944, support for the Democratic Party among black voters rose from less than 25% to over 70%. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't even just. But FDR gave a glimpse of government that could work for the people. And that began the slow departure of black voters from the GOP. Now, let's start with the second part, Truman's military desegregation, 1948. Fast forward, 1948, President Harry Truman, a Democrat, uses Executive Order 9981, desegregating the U.S. Armed Forces. Now, that was bold, and it pissed off Southern Democrats, the Dixiecrats. The same year, Strom Thurmond, he led a revolt, forming the States' Rights Democratic Party, running on a platform of racial segregation and white supremacy. Quote from Strom at that time, and I quote, "There's not enough troops in the army to force the Southern people to break down segregation and admit the N-war race into our theaters, into our swimming pools, into our homes, and into our churches." Yeah, that's who they were. Now, what happened next is key. The Democratic Party began to fracture, split between the Northern Labor Progressive wing and its Southern segregationist wing. But here's what matters. Truman won. And that sent a signal, slow but clear, that Democratic Party was moving inch by inch toward racial progress. Let's go back. Now let's go with part 3. Civil rights and the shattering of the South, the 1950s and 60s. Now, we get to the big one, the Civil Rights era. Brown versus the Board of Education in 1954. Montgomery bus boycott in 1955. The Little Rock Nine in 1957. The March on Washington in 1963. Don't forget Selma. That's still very important, the most important. This movement wasn't just a moral reckoning. It was a political earthquake. And here's where President Lyndon B. Johnson comes in. LBJ wasn't some radical. He was a Southern Democrat himself. But when JFK was assassinated, LBJ stepped in, and he knew the time had come. He signs the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. And when he signs them, he reportedly turns to his staff and says, "We have lost the South for a generation." And that wasn't just poetic. That was prophetic. I mean, the South is still super Republican. Because what happened next? A white Southern revolt. That year, Barry Goldwater, Republican nominee for president, voted against the Civil Rights Act. He said it. What he said it was about states' rights. The same phrase segregationists had used for 100 years. In the Deep South, Alabama, Mississippi, Georgia, South Carolina, Louisiana, all flipped red for the first time in modern history. Let's go to part 4. The Southern strategy begins, 68 to the 80s. Now, let's enter to this. The GOP's master plan to pick up the pieces of white Southern backlash and build a new Republican base around racial resentment. Richard Nixon runs in 1968. His campaign is a masterclass in coded racism. He talks about law and order in the middle of civil rights protests, the silent majority, white Americans fed up with racial justice, states' rights. Again, we know what that means. And it works. Nixon wins the presidency and starts peeling southern states away from the Democrats permanently. But the real mission comes from Lee Atwater, and I already told you about that. the strategy advisor for both Reagan and Bush in 1981, and how the now infamous interview that he said that the N-word, all that stuff. Now, here's the next part of the quote that I haven't told you. That here's the second half of that quote. You're getting so abstract now. You're talking about cutting taxes and all these things, but the byproduct of them is blacks get hurt worse than whites. That's the blueprint. They didn't abandon racism. They made it subtle, respectable, allegedly. And they weaponized it in elections from the 70s through the 80s into today. You don't agree with me or with that? What did Trump say in 2016 about anybody who's Hispanic? They're racist, they're rapists, drug dealers. I mean, come on. And now let's go to part 5. The Reagan to Trump, the new Republican identity. With Nixon's groundwork laid Ronald Reagan, and he took it to the next level. He launched his 1980 campaign in Philadelphia, Mississippi. Funny. The town where civil rights workers James Chaney, Andrew Goodman, and Michael Schwerner were murdered by the Klan in 1964. Her first speech about states' rights. And then came the war on welfare. The myth of the welfare queen, the gutting of public housing and schools, the prison industrial boom, all cloaked in colorblind language, and all while the Republican base, now made up of millions of white, Southern, and evangelical voters, hardened its identity around opposition to the very racial progress they used to brag about supporting. By the time we hit Trump, there's no more subtext. It's not dog whistles. It's blaring air horns. They say shithole countries, very fine people on both sides, birtherism, Muslim bans, voter suppression laws targeting black districts, defending Confederate statues, attacking DEI, calling black cities corrupt and un-American, trying to get people who don't agree with him, mainly minorities, to take away citizenship, kidnapping anybody who looks slightly brown and taking them to a gulag or a concentration camp in Florida. And we're seeing that books, and then we'll see in this today too, books about black history being banned, DEI offices being shut down, AP African American Studies stripped from curriculums, GOP officials openly defending January 6 insurrectionists who waved Confederate flags inside the Capitol, and defending a rapist. So, if you're still clinging to the Lincoln free the slaves, I gotta ask you, what year are you living in? Because this party today, this GOP, they don't just ignore racial justice. They run on resentment of it. So what does this switch mean? Why the lie? Why they lie about it? Why do they lie? Why do the right-wing pundits keep yelling about the KKK and Lincoln like it's a debate team trophy? Because they know. They know their policies today. The bans, the voter roll purges, the race baiting ads, they're indefensible. They know the moral high ground is gone. So they retreat into history, into this comforting fiction where they're still the good guys. They're a bunch of cowards dressed up as patriots. And let's be clear. Yes, the Democratic Party was once the party of slavery. Yes, the Republican Party once supported civil rights. But those are facts of history, not truths of identity. They don't erase the decades of work that people, black organizers, labor leaders, immigrants, and women did to change both parties. And this is not about making saints out of Democrats or demons out of Republicans. This is about the truth, because if you lie about the past, you'll justify injustice in the present. The party of Lincoln is dead, and the people pretending otherwise are counting on you to not notice. But again, in this show, we are wide awake, or as you like to say, you're just a bunch of wokes. And so we talked about the party switch. How it started slow, grew under FDR and Truman, and cracked wide open under LBJ, and got cemented by Nixon. But now it's time to talk about what came next. Not the switch itself, but the cover-up, the rebranding, the strategic well-funded campaign to reshape the GOP into the party of racial grievances while pretending it was still the party of Lincoln. This is the part that too many textbooks skip over, and that right-wing influencers straight up lie about. Because after 1968, the Republican Party didn't just drift toward racism. They embraced it. They recruited it, and then they rebranded it. Alright, so let's start. Let's start with the obvious. After the Civil Rights Act passed in 1964 and the Voting Rights Act in 1965, the Democratic Party lost the South. LBJ saw it coming. And where did those Southern segregationists go? Right into the arms of the Republican Party. Again, let's name the names. Strom Thurmond, former Dixiecrat, lifelong segregationalist, literally ran for president in 1948 because he hated civil rights. He switched to the GOP in 1964. Jesse Helms, notorious North Carolina senator who built his career in opposing civil rights, blocking MLK Day and using race baiting in every election. He was a Democrat until he wasn't. Republican from 1970 onward. Then we have Trent Lott, John Tower, Phil Gramm. More Southern converts to the GOP in the 70s and 80s, all with long records of opposing civil rights legislations. And the Republican Party opened the door, and they didn't just open it; they held it wide open and said, "Come on in. We'll give you a new home. No need to change your views." And here's the thing: they couldn't use the old words anymore. No more N-word, no more segregation signs. By the 70s, that kind of open racism was socially unacceptable in mainstream politics. So they swapped the language. Out went white supremacy, in came welfare queens. Out went segregation, in came busing, neighborhood schools, and states' rights. Out went lynching mobs, and in came law and order. This is where Lee Atwater comes back in, Reagan and Bush's guy, the architect of modern Republican, because he's that important. And that's not a mistake. That's intentional policy by design. Then let's go to Reagan and the Southern dog whistle. Now let's talk about Reagan. He is famous in this podcast. Not for the right reasons. Reagan wasn't just another Republican. He was a full-on myth maker. He's treated like a saint by today's conservatives. Even my dad believed he was the greatest president ever. The small government cowboy, the morning in America guy. But the truth, Reagan was the king of coded racism. Let's start with where he launched his 1980 campaign, Philadelphia, Mississippi. Now, if you know what that means, it's just what that means. It was the location of the where James Chaney, Andrew Goodman, and Michael Schwerner, 3 civil rights workers, were murdered by the Klan in 1964. They were shot, lynched, and buried in a dam. Their bodies were discovered 44 days later. And Reagan went there to that same town to give the first big campaign speech. And what did he talk about? Not civil rights, not healing, not justice. Oh no, buddy, no. He said this. I believe in states' rights. States' rights, always, every time, the same phrase used by every segregationist governor, senator, and sheriff to justify Jim Crow and lynching. He knew exactly what he was doing. He wasn't talking to black voters. He was signaling to white Southerners, don't worry guys, I'm your guy. That was the message. Let's go even deeper. Reagan popularized the myth of the welfare queen. If you don't know, I made an episode. Apparently it's the favorite of everybody. It was a lazy, manipulative woman abusing government handouts and buying luxury items. He never says she was black, but every story, every image, every speech, you knew what he meant. There's no statistical basis for this stereotype. None. Most welfare recipients at that time, and still to this day, are white. But the goal was never truth. It was never about the truth. It was resentment. He wanted white middle-class voters to feel like they were the victims of the system rigged for others. And this laid the foundation for what came next. The war on drugs, the war on crime, the explosion of mass incarceration. Republicans pushed mandatory minimums, harsh sentencing, three-strike laws. They militarized police departments. They flooded black neighborhoods with surveillance while gutting investment in jobs, schools, and housing. And it fucking worked. Politically, they sold racism as safety, inequality as tough love, and neglect as freedom. Now we can skip George H.W. Bush, and the Willie Horton ad, one of the most infamous political smear campaigns in history. Now, this is George Bush Sr., if you didn't know. It was 1988. Bush was running against Michael Dukakis, and Lee Atwater again decided to make one man the face of Democratic weakness. Willie Horton was a black man who, while on a weekend furlough from Massachusetts prison, committed assault and rape. Atwater and Bush's campaign turned this into a full-on fear campaign. They air an ad, mugshot, scary music, narration that basically scream, "If you elect Dukakis, this man is coming to your neighborhood." Now let's be real, that ad didn't say black people are criminals, but it didn't have to. That was the blueprint. And at that time, many people didn't know, like today's social media, we can see everybody's face. Back then, a lot of people didn't know who this man was. They just thought it was just a regular a black person. So then now they're saying, oh, black people are coming in to kill and rape me. Now, and then we get to our most famous person, Donald Trump. No more subtlety, no more dog whistles. This man walked in with a freaking bullhorn, man. And let's just run through the list. And this is just a small list. Just this list alone should have like destroyed anybody else. But because we lived in today's society, let's go over it. He launched his campaign by calling Mexican rapists. He called for a Muslim ban, and he did, and he got blocked. Claimed Black Lives Matter was a hate group. Defended neo-Nazis in Charlottesville by saying they were very fine people on both sides. Told 4 women of color in Congress to go back to where they came from. Said that African nations were shithole countries. He said this. Don't be saying that he didn't. He did say this. He retweeted white nationalists. Pardoned Sheriff Joe Arpaio, who ran a racial profiling police in the state of Arizona. Refused to denounce the Proud Boys on national TV and instead told them to stand back and stand by. And then came January 6th. Confederate flags waving in the Capitol, nooses hung on the lawns, and a movement fueled by the big lie that specifically attacked cities like Atlanta, Detroit, Milwaukee, and Philadelphia because black voters flipped the election. Trump isn't a glitch in the system. He is the system. He is the inevitable product of 50 years of racial rebranding. And people allowed it. And they act shocked now that he's trying to protect a rapist to forget about Jeffrey Epstein. Like, come on. He's on the top of that list, man. Anyways. So what's the GOP doing? He's banning AP African American Studies, shutting down DEI programs at universities, purging the woke books from school libraries, books about MLK, Ruby Bridges, slavery. He's firing teachers who talk about racism, passing voter suppression laws that disproportionately impact Black, Latino, and Native communities. And then they go on TV and say, but Lincoln freed the slaves. It's exhausting. But more than that, it's dangerous. Because when they erase the past, you justify the present. And what they're doing now, it's not about protecting kids. It's about controlling history. Have you ever heard that winners write history? That's what they want. So yeah, the GOP rebranded. They gave racism a new name, a new suit, and a new smile. A ugly orange smile too. God, I feel bad for Melania. Not too bad, but still feel bad. Imagine waking up to that every day. Ugh. Anyways, but beneath the surface, it's the same playbook. Strom Thurmond carried for 1948 is just digital now. Just modernized. Just wrapped in a flag and weaponized for Facebook, Fox News, and the CPAC stages. And if you think this ends with a slogan or a speech, you're wrong. Because this isn't about the elections. It's about education, memory, and power. Because if everybody forgets what happened in the past, then we're gonna be stuck repeating those same mistakes. And so don't let them rewrite the past, because the moment they do, they'll rewrite you out of the future. So let's talk about now. Not 1865, not 1964. Now, 2025. Because if you're still hearing people say Lincoln freed the slaves, while their party's banning Black history, gutting voting rights, and calling Juneteenth woke, you got your answer where the political the Republicans stand. And this isn't about history. It's the power. And the modern Republican Party, they're not hiding racism anymore. Come on, they're so open about it. They're redefining it. They're rebranding it as patriotism. Yeah, Hitler also said Jews were the problem, and they call it patriotism. You guys don't see a pattern here? Come on. And this segment is about the war on racial truth happening right now in schools and legislatures and voting booths and in our own libraries. And I need you to hear this. This isn't just policy, it's an ideological project, a purge to control what gets taught, who gets heard, and who gets to be seen as American. Let's break this down. Let's start with the most foundational right in democracy, the vote. The Voting Rights Act of 1965 was supposed to end racial voter suppression, poll taxes, literacy tests, intimidation, all that. But here's the thing. You don't need a poll tax when you have voter ID laws, gerrymandering, poll closures, and mass voter purges. Since the Supreme Court gutted the Voting Rights Act in Shelby versus Holder in 2013, over 30 states have introduced new restrictions that disproportionately affect Black, Latino, Native, and young voters. Let me give you some examples. Georgia passed the SB 202, which makes it illegal to give water to voters waiting in line, knowing damn well the lines in Black neighborhoods are longer by hours. Texas passed the SB 1, banning 24-hour voting and drive-through voting, both of which were heavily used by Black and Latino voters in Harris County during the 2020 election. Florida purged hundreds of thousands from voter rolls, many of them Black, and arrested people for illegal voting despite state records showing they were clear to vote. North Carolina tried to pass a voter ID law that a federal judge said targeted African Americans with an almost surgical precision. And what is the GOP's justification? Election integrity. Let me translate that for you. We lost in Black cities, so we're going to make sure fewer Black people vote next time. That's what they're saying. That's not integrity. That's suppression with a suit on. They're a bunch of hypocrites, narcissist assholes. Next up, the classroom, because if you want to control the future, you control the kids. That's what they want. Right now, we're watching a full-blown war on public education. And it's not just about curriculum, it's about the control. Let's start with my favorite state, because why not? Texas. Governor Greg Abbott banned the AP African American Studies pilot course in 2023. Why? Because it included topics like intersectionality, the history of police brutality, the legacy of slavery beyond just emancipation, contemporary movements like Black Lives Matter. According to Texas officials, those weren't educational, they were political. Let me be clear. If teaching the full truth about slavery, racism, and resistance is too political for your classroom, then your politics are the problem. And it's not just Texas. Florida under Ron DeSantis, oh god, the top 10 of, he's numbered top 3 of most hated person in this podcast. He has removed over 1,000 books from public school libraries, many of them about Black, brown, and LGBTQ plus experiences. Florida's new social studies standard now teach that I'm not making this up, guys, that slaves develop skills that could be used for their personal benefit. Excuse me? This isn't just ignorance. This is intentional distortion, a rebranding of chattel's slavery as a kind of unpaid internship. And it's not happening in isolation. Books about Ruby Bridges are being banned. Books about Martin Luther King Jr. are under review. And educators are being told to stop using terms like white privilege or systemic racism. I mean, right now the U.S. Army got rid of Jackie Robinson because it was too DEI. And do you think that's about helping kids? Fuck no. No, it's about creating a version of America where racism is ancient history and everyone is still talking about it is the real problem. They just want to say racism was never a thing. That slavery was just a little blip in the system. Now let's talk about DEI. Diversity, equity, and inclusion. The latest GOP boogeyman. In 2023 and 2024 alone, at least 17 Republican-led states passed laws restricting or banning DEI programs at public universities and government offices. Let me tell you, that happened here in Oklahoma because that's what it is. Let me remind you that what DEI programs actually do. Recruit and retain diverse students and faculty. Support marginalized communities. Offer training on bias and harassment. Help build campuses that reflect the real demographics of the country. College should be a melting pot where anybody who comes from just a white neighborhood, they can come to a college and realize that the world is in this country is more than just your white fucking neighborhood. Vice versa. But now, Florida defunded DEI offices at every public college. Same thing with the federal government. Texas passed a law banning any DEI segments in university hiring. Oklahoma's governor banned DEI in all state agencies. That's Stitt, Governor Stitt, if you want to know who that is. As we like to call him here in Oklahoma, Governor Shithead. And across the country, conservative think tanks are pushing model legislations to do the same everywhere else. Why? Because DEI threatens the narrative that everything's already equal. Because they know that if you teach young people how inequality works, they might stop accepting it. And let's be clear, the real goal isn't to end wokeness. The goal is to end the awareness. If people can't name injustice, they can't fight it. And if they can't fight it, the status quo stays safe for the few that actually benefits. Who are they? The rich 1%, usually just white Republicans. Duh. And let's take a minute to talk about symbolism. The GOP's new move is to take every form of racial justice and brand it as anti-American. Juneteenth? Too divisive. Colin Kaepernick taking a knee? Oh, disrespecting the troops. Oh. BLM protests? A bunch of Marxists, riots, and a bunch of thugs. Teaching about redlining or police brutality? Hate-filled propaganda. The same people who say we're the party of Lincoln are now mocking the federal holiday celebrating the end of slavery. You can't make this up. And don't even get me started on the flag. You know what the real patriotism is? Telling the truth about your country, wanting to live up to its promises, and holding it accountable when it fails. But the GOP isn't promoting patriotism. They're pushing nationalism, the kind that needs enemies to survive. And right now, the enemy is anyone who remembers how we got here. And let's not pretend this just started with Trump, but let's not ignore what he did. Trump mainstreamed white grievances. He turned racism into campaign strategy, not just background noise, but the point. He called COVID the China virus and stoked anti-Asian violence. He refused to condemn white supremacists in Charlottesville. He targeted black cities in every bogus election fraud claim. He said Haitian immigrants, they all have AIDS and they're eating pets. He said Nigerian immigrants will never go back to their huts. And he launched his political career on the lie that the first black president wasn't born in America. And guess what? That fucking worked because, yeah. Also, the Democratic Party didn't do themselves any favor by stopping Bernie Sanders from winning. Anyways, and because the racial resentment mobilized voters, it energized the base. It gives them something to fight against, someone to blame. And the playbook didn't die in 2020. It's alive here and now. It's more than bad. It's horrible now. In 2025, in school board races, city council, state houses, and governor's mansions. So here we are, 2025, where a political party that claims to love Lincoln is banning books about slavery, purging voters from rolls, firing teachers for discussing race, or just treating treating students with respect because they're human beings as well, shutting down diversity programs, mocking Juneteenth, and blaming wokeness for everything wrong with the world. And you want the quote? Because here's a quote. If the party that freed the slaves now bans books about slavery, you have your answer. You can call yourself pro-Black history when you're erasing it. You can't pretend to love America while trying to ban half of its story. You can't claim to be colorblind while building a whole political identity around color-coded fear. This isn't about left versus right. It's about truth versus erasure, justice versus denial, belonging versus exclusion. And they're not hiding racism anymore. They're repacking it as common sense or parental rights or patriotism. But don't be fooled. Because when they come for the books, they come for the voters. When they come for the curriculum, they come for your kids. When they come for DEI, they come for who gets to lead, who gets to belong, and who gets remember. This isn't just politics. It's a memory warfare. And we're not losing ours here. And so if you've been listening so far and you're like, dude, what's your deal with the Republicans? It's because it's obvious. But this is an actual fair podcast. I call bullshit on both sides. Let's talk about it. Because let's be honest. Because if you've been listening and thinking, yeah, but the Democrats have done their dirt too, you are correct. I'm not denying that. And I'm not here to defend them like they're saints. Because they're not. They never have been, and some of them never will be. And let's say plainly, the Democrat Party has its own long, ugly history with racism. It was Democrats who enforced Jim Crow for almost a century. It was Democrats who filibustered anti-lynching bills until the 1940s. And yeah, it was Democrats who locked arms with the KKK in the early 20th century to maintain their racial status quo. And I mentioned this is just a big split though. Okay, even after the party started to shift in the 1960s, that tension didn't go away. Let's take a good look at Joe Biden, our former president. He, in his political career, he authored the 1994 crime bill, which fueled mass incarceration and disproportionately impact Black communities. He gave warm praise to segregationist senators like James Eastland, opposed school busing in the 1970s, and he only evolved on key issues like same-sex marriage and drug sentencing after public pressure and electoral necessity. And he's not the only one. You've got people in Congress, like mostly establishment Democrats, who've been sitting in those seats for decades, cashing in donation checks, showing up for votes after the protests happened, after the movement, and because those movements forced them to care. Let's name them. Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, Hakeem Jeffries. They're dragging their feet on any kind of reform. Dianne Feinstein, who dismissed student activists demanding action on climate and gun violence. Jim Clyburn, using his political capital to shut down progressive while backing corporate candidates in the fucking South. And dozens of centrist Democrats with 12, 16, and even 30 years in Congress who haven't passed meaningful legislation on racial justice, housing, healthcare, or education. These people aren't fighting for power. They are the power. They need to be removed. And sometimes they rather lose the Republican than let the progressive threaten the status quo. They rather lose to a Republican. So yeah, let's not pretend that Democrats are above critique. Let's not forget that Obama deported more people than any president in U.S. history. Here's the quote. Here's the problem. He did deport them. But there was actual process for that. What Trump is doing is highly legal. What Obama did, yes, he deported more people. There was a lot more due process. Now, let's not ignore how Kamala Harris laughed about jailing parents over truancy and fought to keep people locked up past their sentences to maintain cheap prison labor. Let's not pretend they fixed the system they claim to care about. But here's the thing. There's a difference between failure and sabotage. There's a difference between inertia and intentional harm. And when it comes to racism in modern politics, intentional harm is coming from the right, and they're using your cynicism as a weapon. And this is their bait. Both parties are bad, so don't vote. I hate that so much. It's like both politics, both are terrible. That's the biggest fucking bullshit I hear all the time. Oh my god, I'll get into it in a minute. Democrats started the KKK, so Republicans must be the good guys. Or Democrats passed the crime bill, so racism is the same on both sides. Because that's not true. That's a psyop. Let's be clear. One party is banning books about slavery. One party is shutting down DEI. One party is gutting voting rights. One party is embracing white nationalism in its candidates and followers. One party is actively trying to undo the civil rights progress of the last 60 years, not by accident, but by design. And one party has passed more gun rights than to prevent homelessness and fund education. Yes, Democrats have failed, but Republicans are actively fighting to turn back the clock. They're not just ignoring racism, they are defining it as un-American. And here, when you pretend both sides are equally bad, you paralyze people. You disengage them. And guess what? That helps the people with the least interest in change. That helps the billionaire donors who fund voter suppression, the school boards banning Black history books, the legislation writing bills that criminalize protests, the cops who never get charged, the sheriffs running private ICE jails, and the think tanks funding curriculum bans. This false equivalency is not neutral. It's not clever. It's a gift to the architects of oppression. Yes, criticize the Democrats, but with purpose. I want better from the Democratic Party too. Technically, I align with the Democratic Party, but I disagree with them a lot. But I align more with the liberal side. It's like I want Medicare for all, tuition-free public universities or college, real criminal justice reform, reparations for slavery and anything like that, abolishing ICE, housing as a human right, climate justice now, an actual end to the prison industrial complex, and cutting the defense budget. You don't need $1 trillion, guys. Come on. And the truth is, establishment Democrats have blocked a lot of that progress. They take money from the same corporations Republicans do. They let lobbyists with too many bills. Too many bills. They wait for the polls to move before they act. But I will never, ever let their failures be used to excuse intentional white supremacy on the other side. Being a disappointment is not the same thing as being a danger. So what do we do? We hold the Democrats accountable, not with silence, but with pressure. We primary the corporate ones, not with tweets, but with ballots. We push the damn overturned window, not with hashtags, but with organizing. Because if we just walk away, if we say, they're all the same, then guess who's gonna win? The people who want you silent. The people who pray you give up. The people who rely on low turnout, misinformation, and political exhaustion to stay in power. And guys, I'm tired too. Tired of broken promises. Tired of shallow representation. Tired of being told to be grateful for crumbs while people are dying in prisons, in hospitals, in deserts, and traffic stops. But I'm not tired enough to be fooled. Because I know the difference between a system that needs reform and a movement that wants to destroy the very idea of equality. And when the Republican Party bans books, erases history, mocks Black lives, and lies about their past, don't fall for it. I need you to call out the Democrats. Hold them to a higher standard. But don't let the party of voter suppression, Confederate cosplay, and open racism hide behind Lincoln's ghost. Because they're not just lying to you. They're lying about you. And we're not going to let them get away with it. Let's close this out. And I'm not going to close this with a recap today, but with something real. Because I didn't make this episode to argue about Lincoln. I didn't spend hours researching just to own someone online who's still clinging to a meme they saw from PragerU. I did this because I'm frustrated. Because every single day I look around and think, how are we still here? How are we still letting the same people, the same party, spin the same lie while people die? How did you say you're the party of life while leaving Texans to drown in their homes? Like right now, I'm pretty sure there's over 120 people dead on those Texas floods that just happened. From flooding that could have been prevented, like predicted, that could have been prevented, that could have been mitigated with real infrastructure, with actual investment, with functioning emergency systems. Now, everybody will say, well, like, would it have stopped all the deaths? Probably not, but it will not. But it will prevent this mass death. What's going on? But what did they do instead? They cut the budgets. They ignored the warnings. They politicized the science. And then they move on. No accountability, no urgency, no help. And then they had the audacity to call themselves the fucking patriots. And that's not even half of it. Because while Texas floods and burns and freezes, while black voters wait in 5-hour lines in Georgia just to cast a ballot, while schools ban books about Harriet Tubman, the GOP is out here defending a man who was found liable for rape. Donald Trump. This man, the so-called champion of their movement, has dozens of sexual misconduct accusations. He bragged on tape about assaulting women. He mocked a disabled reporter. He called countries full of black and brown people shitholes. He led a movement that ended with Confederate flags flying inside the Capitol. And he is defending Jeffrey Epstein because he was a dear friend and very likely a big time client of Jeffrey Epstein. So I'm going to say he's a rapist of minors. And they're defending him. They're running him again. Like, if they could, they will run him forever. They're rewriting laws to protect him while criminalizing you. So when I hear the Republican Party talk about family values, I want to just punch them in the face. What values? Whose family? You don't get to call yourself the moral party while backing a man who said he could just shoot someone on Fifth Avenue and not lose a vote. And you prove him right. And I know some people will hear this and said, well, Democrats haven't fixed everything neither. And to that I say, you are correct. Democrats are guilty of their own failures. They're compromised when they should have stood firm. They let corporations buy their silence. They said all the right things while doing just enough to get reelected. Some of them, especially the ones who've been in Congress 12, 16, 20 years or anything, they become part of the same machine they claim to be fighting. You got establishment Democrats who show up to every photo op, every speech, every fundraiser, but when it's time to pass real police reform or end ICE contracts or get Medicare for all on the floor, suddenly it's not the right time. It's too divisive. Suddenly it's, we'll get to it after the next election. No, fuck that. Enough of that. I'm done with that. But here's the difference. One party fails to act fast enough. The other party builds its entire identity on keeping power by turning you against your neighbor. That's not just negligence, it's malice. The GOP isn't just playing dirty, they are playing dangerous. They're passing laws to suppress votes in black and brown communities. They're shutting down diversity programs in schools. They're banning books, banning ideas. They're literally rewriting slavery as a skill training program. I mean, for the love of fucking God, how much more you need? And we're turning around and saying, we're not the racists. They are. We freed the slaves. You see what they're doing, right? They're not just lying about the past. They're weaponizing. They justify the violence of the present. And I see this all the time. I feel it in my bones as an educator, as a veteran, as a Latino immigrant, as someone who just wants to believe that justice is possible. And every day I'm reminded that we are surrounded by people who will rather erase the truth than confront it. People who say all lives matter while cheating police budgets and defunding public schools. People who say back the blue but set silent when cops were murdered on January 6th. People who say we're the party of Lincoln, but want to dismantle every single civil rights protection Lincoln helped make fucking possible. Did I make my point clear here? Okay, cool. So yeah, I'm tired. But I'm not going to let that fatigue become silence. I'm not going to let this twisted version of patriotism go unchecked. Because real patriotism isn't about waving a flag. It's about living up to the promise of that flag. Liberty, equality, justice for all. And right now, the people wrapping themselves in red, white, and blue are the ones doing the most to destroy that promise. You know what's the crazy thing? Like, being patriotic used to be something like about the promise. Nowadays, if you go around on July 4th or any day and people wrap themselves in flags, you know where they stand now. And it's so sad. The flag should not represent hate, but it does now. And because it's so crazy. If you've seen it, guys. You've seen people who put like 20 flags on the front porch. I'm exaggerating, but like flags on the porch for no reason. And you know where they're standing. Like, you know what they're voting for. It is so sad. Like, being patriotic is awesome. It's okay to be patriotic. But you need to understand that patriotism doesn't mean that you accept everything in this magical thing in this country. Being patriotic means you admit your failures and then you move forward to make it better. That's how relationships are better. If you have a spouse and you guys fight, you don't just gaslight your spouse about the fight and just forget that never happened. You learn from what happened and you get better, and you know what happens? Oh my God, your relationship is 1,000,000 times better, and you learn. Anyways, so I'm going to leave you with this. Racism isn't about which party you voted for in the 1860s. It's about which party profits off racial division in 2025, right now. It's about who writes the laws, who tells the story, who gets a raise, who gets protected, and who gets blamed. If the party that once freed the slave now wants book bans about slavery, then don't let them call the progress. If the party that once championed freedom now defends the rapists and attacks black voters, then don't let them use history as a shield. And if you've been sitting in silence waiting for someone else to fix this fucking problem, just know your silence is not neutral. It's permission. Anyways, we talked about a lot for today. And having the standing decks, guys, I'm very animated. History, hypocrisy, policy, pain. But here's what I need you to take with you. History is not a weapon unless you let it be. Memory should not be propaganda unless you erase it. Justice isn't partisan unless you make it optional. So don't forget, don't disengage. Don't both sides your way out of the truth. This isn't about a party. It's about a pattern, and it's time to break it. One last thing I'm going to say before I get out of here. Why is the Republicans now all of a sudden so against releasing the Jeffrey Epstein client list? Ever since Trump was like, why are we still talking about this? Listen, guys, he ran for since 2018 saying that he wants to release those files, and guess what? Now he wants nothing to do with it. Just putting that out there because he's on the list. He's probably the #1 client. He's a fucking rapist. He should be impeached. And if you say, well, Clinton is in it, okay, good. Get him in jail too. I wasn't alive when I wasn't. Oh, I was alive. I wasn't. I don't care what Clinton did. That was in the 90s, bro. Who cares? If he's a rapist, send him to jail. I don't give a. I don't give a shit. Criminals deserve to be punished. So I want you to understand this. I'm whispering this because I'm kind of tired of this. I'm not really whispering. I'm just tired. But I'll say this. Just look at who is trying to protect Trump right now. It's a lot of the Republicans. And I'm pretty sure it's because their names are on the list. I don't give a shit if Democrats are on the list. If they're on the list, get their asses out. But right now, we need to get these motherfuckers out. Anyways, thanks for listening. Thanks for fighting. Don't stop now. Call you Congress people. Use the 5 calls app. Demand the release of these Epstein files now. I mean, who? What else can we do? We need to release those suckers now. Because we know Donald J. Trump is going to be number one on that list. And I will be here laughing every second of the way there. Have a good rest of everyone.